part of the way that we help prepare ourselves for severe weather is through partnerships with local organizations who are on the forefront of forecasting and alerting us when severe weather is on its way. Joining us now from the National Weather Service and their Pontiac, Detroit office is Rich Pollman, Warning Coordination Meteorologist. Rich, thank you for being with us.
Oh, happy to join you and happy to talk about severe weather preparedness.
Yeah, it's a really important topic, especially this time of the year. And granted, we're really early on into the spring, but the spring transition is part of what kind of brings on this severe weather. Because in Michigan, you've got all four seasons. Half of the year is cold, half of the year it can be extremely warm and humid. And so, how does that transition, how does that dichotomy create kind of the perfect situation for severe weather during this time of the year and especially in the summer?
Yeah, so for our thunderstorms to form, we really do need that warm, moist, and humid air clashing with the storm systems that move through the Great Lakes region periodically, every third or fourth day. And so in the springtime, that's when we start to see the first signs of that warm and more humid air arriving in the state. This week of Severe Weather Awareness Week has been a little chillier than average, but we have certainly seen some warm weather already this year. And those intrusions of the warm, unstable air are going to be more commonplace as we go through the springtime. And then, yeah, once we get into the summertime, we almost always have that warm, moist, unstable air in place. We just need something to act on it to trigger our thunderstorms. And so we wait for those cold fronts or an upper level piece of energy in the atmosphere to trigger those thunderstorms in the summertime. In the springtime, it takes a little bit more of everything coming together because we don't always get into that warm, unstable air in April. But when we do, we can run the risk of severe weather in any month of the season.
And we kind of slid by this earlier on in our conversation a moment ago that, Severe Weather Awareness Week is early on in March. It's in the middle of March, and that's early on in the severe weather season. But that doesn't mean we're unfamiliar to some severe weather, including those major storms this time of the year. Just weeks ago, we had tornadoes touch down in multiple areas of the state of Michigan. So why particularly, especially from your angle at the National Weather Service, is this time of the year the time to start being hyper aware of severe weather?
Yeah, for our part of the state of Michigan, you really start to see an increase in the threat of severe weather once we get to April. And so we want to prepare before that ramp up in April. But it doesn't preclude us from having severe weather any month of the year. If we get the right conditions, we have seen severe weather in the wintertime, December, January, and February. We saw the Grand Blanc and the Marshall tornadoes on February 27th and 28th of this year. So if you have that warm, moist, unstable air, you have a strong storm system, you can trigger severe weather even in the month of February. But year over year, we really start to see the ramp up in April. So we use March as our month to prepare for severe weather before we get into the season in April. We reach our peak in June and July in the state of Michigan. And so we really want to be prepared as we head into the spring, late spring, and into the first half of the summer, especially.
Rich Pollman's with us, Warning Coordination Meteorologist with the National Weather Service's office in Detroit and Pontiac, located in White Lake. Find more information on our local weather, including information on severe weather awareness, weather.gov/DTX. And you can even put in your zip code on that website for even more hyper-localized information about severe weather. And Rich, as we get closer to the major portion of the severe weather season, as you mentioned, it kind of ramps up in April, and then it's certainly at a peak throughout the middle of the summer. When does that process of being aware of the severe weather and starting to prepare our local area begin, when we have some potential for severe weather in the forecast?
So when we are expecting a severe weather event, we have our severe weather outlooks issued daily. It goes out for 8 days from our Storm Prediction Center, and our local office will help relay that information, and we'll put out information through social media and on our website about that threat of severe weather, just sort of as an outlook to review those plans, make sure you know what the forecast is, to pay attention to that particular day's forecast as we get closer and closer to that. Then on the day of severe weather, we also have the outlook for the first day of the forecast. That might come out in the early morning hours, an updated outlook. And then as we get closer in the afternoon and evening, when the severe weather threat's really going to hit, we will issue a tornado watch or a severe thunderstorm watch in advance of that storm. The watch is going to be issued about 2 to 6 hours in advance of severe weather. And so that's the time for sort of final preparations, review those severe weather plans, maybe just touch base with your family, with your coworkers, make sure everybody knows what those plans are so that when a warning is issued, you can take action right away.
And from your side, at the National Weather Service, how important in this process is partnership, both at the federal and state level, but also at the county and hyper-local level as you're forecasting this severe weather?
Yeah, we work all the time with our government partners, especially in the emergency management community. On the federal level, it's going to be with FEMA, but really most of our partnerships with preparedness and getting the word out about severe thunderstorm watches and tornado watches, and then the action that's needed when warnings are issued. Those partnerships are really with the local and county, and to some extent also the state emergency management programs. And so the emergency management program is responsible for preparedness on all hazards, whether they're natural or some man-made hazards. But we work specifically, obviously, with the weather hazards with our local county and local emergency managers.
And when you're working with those local and beyond emergency managers, what is that process like as you're getting updated forecasts and that information's coming in and you kind of start to understand the pattern of that severe weather as it goes toward a potential target area?
Yeah, so we communicate with them all the time, whether it's prior to the season with meetings ahead of the season to talk about severe weather preparedness, any new information streams that we might have at the National Weather Service. And then leading up to that, as we have all those outlooks that you can see on the web pages and you see the local media talking about the severe weather outlooks, we are sending specific partner messages to those government partners, especially in the emergency management community, to highlight the particular day's threat. And in those messages, we might get a little bit more specific about what the threat is for wind, hail, tornadoes, and try to put it into context for Southeast Michigan so that those emergency managers can prepare their community for what the impending weather is going to be.
Rich Pollman is with us, warning coordination meteorologist with the National Weather Service's Detroit Pontiac office out of White Lake. You can find more information on severe weather and, of course, daily weather updates for your local area, weather.gov/DTX. That will give you an overview for the Detroit area, and then you have an option to put in your specific zip code or zip codes you may be frequenting during that particular day or period of days for even more localized information. Very important resource as we are recognizing Severe Weather Awareness Week and are in the severe weather season here in the state of Michigan. Rich, over the past couple of seasons, both in our fall and especially in this past winter season, we've had some unseasonable weather patterns too. We've had several periods of very warm days, including some 60s and 70s toward the tail end of the winter, and not just in isolated periods, but for even full week or 2 week long lengths. How are those kind of odd weather patterns from a layman's perspective maybe factoring into what the National Weather Service and other partners of the Weather Service are looking at as we get towards severe weather season? Because like you said, those patterns have to be, those conditions have to be perfect with a certain amount of warm weather and moisture in order to create that severe weather.
Yeah, so you're right. We had our warmest winter that anyone alive remembers in Southeast Michigan. You really have to go back to at least 1931 or maybe even into the 1800s to have a winter that was warmer than our winter that we had just this past 3-4 months. And that was all caused by a very strong El Nino. And that El Nino pattern is actually going to be weakening through the spring, but our forecast for the spring is actually a continuation of the much above normal temperatures. The one thing that is also in the forecast is below normal likelihood for precipitation. So we do need both of those things, the heat and the moisture, to come together. And so while we might see a continuation of this pattern of well above normal temperatures into the spring, there's probably a little bit of a question about how often we're going to get into the moisture pattern to help form the thunderstorm. So uh, we're kind of conditionally set up for some active weather this spring, but we're just going to have to see how the heat and that moisture, with maybe a cold front moving through lower Michigan, how that all teams up to potentially produce any severe weather as we get into April, May, and June.
And given those conditions, what sort of work is being done by the National Weather Service? So, what resources are available through the National Weather Service for people to understand how severe weather can affect our local area, how these patterns and the communication from the National Weather Service and local authorities come together, and especially ways they can be prepared to prevent any harm to themselves, their families, their homes when severe weather is in the forecast?
Yeah, so for Severe Weather Awareness Week, we're putting information out on social media. We also have our webpage for Michigan Severe Weather Awareness Week with links to all the information, both on a local level for the state of Michigan, but also through the National Weather Service's national safety page that talks about all sorts of severe weather preparedness. It's really about coming up and developing a plan for your home, place where you work. Certainly, schools develop their severe weather plans, review those plans, and then the most important thing is to get that weather information, whether it's through your cell phones, through local media, radio, television, internet sources. But and the weather radio also can be a key component to that. The important thing with a warning that you might get is that I have backup systems. Get the warning multiple ways, because you never know when maybe a cell tower goes down, you lose power, you can't access your television. So you want to have backup ways, multiple ways to receive that warning. If you're sleeping in the middle of the night, a cell phone warning may wake you up, may not, but a weather radio is as loud as a smoke detector. And if we issue a tornado warning at 3 a.m., you can wake up your family, get your family to a place of safety and shelter within your home. So you want to have multiple ways to get that warning, just in case one system suffers from the effects of the storm itself.
More information, weather.gov/DTX. At the top of that screen, you'll see news headlines and a Michigan Severe Weather Awareness Week headline there. Click on that. So many resources, so much information that you can find for Severe Weather Awareness Week and beyond. Weather.gov/DTX. Rich Pollman is with us, warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service's Detroit Pontiac office out of White Lake here in our local area. Rich, there's so many other ways too that people can get involved in our community on the front lines that can help the National Weather Service and other resources locally, countywide, statewide, and federally during severe weather season, particularly becoming a Skywarn spotter. We got some trainings coming up too.
Yeah, during the springtime, and we prepare for severe weather season by training spotters. And we do that through the months of March, April, and May. There are some virtual options. There are some in-person options across Southeast Michigan. So, yeah, go to our website and see what training class works best for you. But we are looking for those volunteers. So, the radars and satellite systems, they're great at depicting the threat of severe weather, but they're looking at that threat of severe weather inside the thunderstorm, and the radar beam cannot see below the cloud base to the ground. So while we see that there's large hail in the storm, we don't know if that large hail is falling down as a 1 inch hailstone or a golf ball size or maybe baseball size hail. And so the spotter helps us verify the hail signature in the radar. Wind is even harder to determine inside the storm with the radar. We can see some wind signatures, but is that wind signature reaching the ground, or is it capped at 3,000 feet in the storm? And so the spotter will help us know what the wind gust estimate is. Are there any trees coming down? And then finally, we can see the rotation in the low level of the cloud base with a rotating thunderstorm that might produce a tornado. The spotter will help us by telling us if they see a funnel cloud or a tornado when the funnel actually touches the ground and causes damage. And so they can be our first eyes and ears for that threat of a tornado. And so by giving us those reports, they help the warning system because we want to have all the warnings out before the storm hits. So you would have a warning hopefully out before you see the tornado as a spotter. But that report can help us and educate us as we warn for the next county over. And so that helps our warning process, not only for your community, but all the communities around you.
And it goes back to those partnerships that we talked about earlier on with the National Weather Service's offices all throughout the state of Michigan, their local and county partnerships in helping to forecast storms before they get to areas that will later be affected, like us here in Oakland County. Rich Pollman's with us from the National Weather Service's Detroit Pontiac office on today's edition of the Splash Live as we recognize Severe Weather Awareness Week. Rich, anything else that would be important for our audience to keep in consideration at this time as they also recognize Severe Weather Awareness Week?
Well, I think the main thing is just to have those multiple ways to get the warning and really listen to the forecast, know when we have the threat of severe weather, and then rely on those severe weather plans that you have already made. Just review those severe weather plans when we have our severe weather threat later in the summer. This is the time to make those plans so that if a warning is issued later in the year, you can immediately act on it. You don't have to think about where do I need to go in my home, where I'm at work, where's the tornado shelter. So we just want to make sure that you make those plans now, so that when a warning is issued, you can act on it right away and get your family, your coworkers, all to a place of safety.
So many resources available through our local authorities, including the National Weather Service. Rich, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, always happy to help. Thanks for inviting me on.